tell him a thing or two. That's heroism to us. To God, it's the very opposite of love. Love does not retaliate. And that's something new to the Greeks. The Christian is one who loves. So the Christian is one who is hurt and insulted and injured and in a position to take revenge, but he never does. He never does. The word literally means long-tempered. Long-tempered. It has a long fuse. You can study all throughout the New Testament, and you'll study the word again and again because it appears so many times. Paul said it was characteristic of his own heart, 2 Corinthians 6:6. He said it should be characteristic of every Christian, Ephesians 4:2. Everyone ought to be characterized by meekness and lowliness and long-suffering. Paul said it was one of the fruit of the Spirit, wasn't it? Now, if you need a model to follow, it's not too hard to find some. God was long-suffering. Romans chapter 2, verse 4 says that the person who rejects God's grace is really, and this is a simple way to put it, despising the riches of His goodness and forbearance and long-suffering. Somebody who constantly turns his back on God is despising God's patience, His long-suffering. God is long-suffering. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it says that God is long-suffering, not willing, what? That any should perish. So if you're looking for someone who's long-suffering, it's God. You say, well, it's kind of hard to model my life after God. He's too abstract. Okay, how about Christ? The Lord Jesus Christ, hanging on the cross after He had endured all that He had endured, had nothing more to say about His killers than this. Father, what? Forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And then there is another model. You say, well, Jesus is hard for me to model after too. Well, how would you like to try Stephen? He's a little more earthy. 7th chapter of Acts, the 60th verse, he's under the crushing blows of the stones, and he says, God, lay not this sin to their charge. And he fell asleep. He was long-tempered. No vengeance, no retaliation, no bitterness, no animosity, no fighting back. Can you imagine what the church would be like if everybody was like that? Nobody ever sought revenge. Can you imagine what your home would be like? If if in your home your wife does something you don't like and you silently say, I'll show her. See if she gets another word out of me. See if she gets that new dress. I'll come home late and the dinner will be cold. Ha! It's the spirit of retaliation. But that's not love, is it? Love can be wronged and wronged and wronged and never wants revenge. That's the way to define love. Robert Ingersoll, the brilliant atheist, if any atheist could be classified as brilliant, lived in the last century. And he stopped, as he used to like to do, in the middle of one of his lectures against God, and he took out his watch and he held it up to his audience and he says, I'll give God 5 minutes to strike me dead for the things I've said. That's the way he used to mock God. Well, he wasn't struck dead. Somebody told this incident to the great Christian Theodore Parker, and Parker smiled and said this, quote, and did the gentleman think he could exhaust the patience of the eternal God in 5 minutes? God is patient, isn't He? Aren't you glad? If He wasn't, you'd have been wiped out long ago. So would I. People say, oh, but He's wronged me again and again. Yes, and God could say that, couldn't He? Think about Israel. The story of Israel, the record of a patient love on the part of God for a rebellious, disobedient, sinful, disloyal people. You say, yeah. Yeah, well, before you say that too loud, it sounds a lot like my biography, too. If God was impatient, we'd be long gone, but God is a suffering God. Powerful feature of love. You know, when you deal with people with patience, it has a tremendous effect. When there's no retaliation. A great story of that concerns Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln Made a lot of friends, made some enemies. One man who became a rather outspoken enemy was named Stanton. Some of you historians remember him. Stanton just despised Lincoln. In fact, in print, he called him a low, cunning clown. And on one occasion, he nicknamed him the original gorilla. And he said that it was ridiculous for people to go to Africa, wandering around trying to find a gorilla when they could find one easily in Springfield, Illinois. Very bitter toward Lincoln. And Lincoln never, ever replied to him, never said a word to him. Came time to choose a war minister for the United States government, and Lincoln chose Stanton. Somebody said, why? He said, because he's the best man. The years wore on, and the biographer said this: the night when the assassin's bullet tore out Lincoln's life, in the little room to which the president's body was taken, there stood that same Stanton, looking down into the silent face of Lincoln in all its ruggedness and speaking through his tears these words, quote, "There lies the greatest ruler of men the world has ever seen," end quote. He never accepted Lincoln's politics, but he couldn't resist his patience. He couldn't resist the non-retaliating spirit of the man. The song says, killing her softly with kindness, patience. Love forgives 70 times 7 when it's been wrong.
You're listening to Grace to You as John Macarthur continues his series in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's titled The Greatest of These, a practical look at what biblical love is and how you show it to others, whether they're Christians or unbelievers, that kind of love. And John is not only the featured Bible teacher here on this broadcast, he's a pastor, author, and president of the Master's College and Seminary. They're all located in the Los Angeles area. John, for any listener wondering what biblical love might look like, I know that you have an example with you, a touching letter from a listener who recently practiced the act of love that you talked about today.
It's a wonderful letter, Carl. Let me just read it to you. Dear John Macarthur and all who make Grace to You possible, I wanted to write you for a while, and I've let other distractions get in the way of me taking the time to write. I decided today I couldn't wait one more day to let you know how much Grace to You has ministered to me and my family this past year. My husband and I were visiting